Hi everyone, Pastor Jimmy at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church coming to you today with our continuing series on the journey to the cross. We've seen Jesus on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday so far right before Easter. We saw on Sunday how he came into Jerusalem as the Messiah, as we saw people singing Hosanna and praises to his name. Then we saw how on Monday morning he came back into Jerusalem. On the way in, we saw him curse the fig tree, which was a symbol of Israel and what they have not done for God. And then we saw him go and cleanse the temple of all the money exchangers and those making his house, as he calls it, a den of thieves instead of a house of prayer. And then we saw on Tuesday how he gave a lesson about the fig tree and how there was not enough faith in our prayers and how we should have more faith in our prayers. And then we saw him go and teach at the temple, and we saw how the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders tried to trap him, but he was able to share parables and enlighten the people. And then we saw him predict the future. Today on Wednesday, there's not a whole lot going on in the Bible. If we look in Luke chapter 21 and then in Matthew chapter 26 or Mark chapter 14, if we look in these chapters, it just gives us a little bit of what Jesus had done during those days. We're not for sure if the events that I'm going to talk to you about today actually occurred on the Wednesday, but we assume that they did occur on the Wednesday. In the Bible, Luke chapter 21, it says, every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the mount called Olivet. And early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. So we see that Jesus continued to teach. So this Wednesday, he's continuing to teach. The people are continuing to come to listen to him and to hear what he has to say. He's gathering large crowds together, and they're hearing the truth about who he is and what God has done. And he's teaching them about the kingdom of heaven, and he's teaching them about God. And so we see him continuing to teach. Now, one thing we need to remember about this is that Jesus knows what is going to happen on Friday. He knows that he is heading to the cross. He knows that he's going to be betrayed. He knows that they're going to sacrifice him and beat him. And he knows all these things. And yet he's willingly still out there teaching about God and teaching about what is to come. And he knows that a lot of these people that he's teaching to will be some of the same people that will be yelling, "Crucify him," in just a few days. But yet his love for them is so great, he continues to teach to them. And he continues to tell them what is important for them to know and for them to learn in their lives about God and about him. So really, this is kind of a quiet day as far as we know for Jesus. It's a day of him teaching, a day of him doing what he normally does. His authority, his actions, and his teachings have brought people out to hear him. So many people are coming to hear him at this point. But that's not the only thing we see that's happening this day. Even though there are many people coming to hear Jesus teach and preach, there are many that are coming to hear him teach and preach that are not happy with what he's teaching and preaching. He is making a lot of enemies, a lot of powerful enemies that are determined to kill him at this point. We see in Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 3, it says, "Then the chief priest and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, 'Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people.'" You can also read in Mark chapter 14, verses 1 and 2, in Luke chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, that they were trying to arrest him in quietness. They didn't want to arrest him in public. This was a time when there were just a large number of people in Jerusalem for the Passover and for the feast, and they wanted to wait till after this to arrest Jesus. But they had made up their mind at this point that whatever it took, they were going to do so they could kill Jesus and get him out of the way. They were upset at his teachings because his teachings were going against their teachings. They claimed that their teachings were from God, but in reality their teachings were from man. It was from their own being and their own doing. And they were powerful because of these teachings. They were making lots of money because of these teachings. And so Jesus was taking that power and that money away from them with his teachings, and it was going against theirs, and so they wanted to kill him. But they were willing to buy their time because they thought they knew what the people would want. They thought they knew what would happen. They had no idea that the whole plan that God had required Jesus to die on the cross. They thought this was their plan. They thought they were going to do it in their time and in their way. But little did they know that God had already worked out everything, and everything in his perfect timing and his perfect plan and his perfect will. And so here on Wednesday, we see Jesus continuing to teach. We see now the plot really start to take effect and move quickly now for those that wanted to kill Jesus. But they had no idea that God had already had all this planned out. And it just goes to show us that our plans are nothing compared to God's plans. We can try and maneuver and do the things we want, but eventually it all comes down to God's will and God's way in our life. So we've seen Jesus now, Wednesday being kind of a quiet day. In our next video, we'll look at what happens on Thursday, and this is where everything starts getting busy. We'll see the Last Supper or the Passover meal. We'll see Jesus praying in the garden. We'll see the betrayal. We'll start seeing a lot of things happen on Thursday. So Thursday and Friday are going to be really busy. We're going to try to squeeze as much as we can into the next two videos as we take the journey to the cross with Jesus Christ.